The presentation is aimed at first-level executives, in which, in a general way, the economic environment in the world and also some information about countries in terms of trade. Also, we will share a macroeconomic vision for next year in political, economic, and social aspects. So it will be helpful to face the challenges and see the opportunities and risks for a better decision making. Judith, do you have the resume? Thank you very much. Yes, we're saying that we have a great person that will give us this economic view of the world, Carlos Roberto González Tabares, and he also related with equity, money, in fixed income market, foreign markets. Also has a master's degree in business economics. He has experience as a professor in different universities, UP, ITAM, ITESM, UNAM. And he's a director of analysis and strategy of the stock market from 2011 so far. And he's a president of the analysis committee since 2013 so far. Let us welcome Mr. Carlos Alberto González Tabares. Welcome. Thank you very much, Frida. Good afternoon, you all. First and foremost, thank you for your invitation. Can you hear me okay? Yes. So I have this presentation that I would like to share with you. Hopefully there won't be any technical issues. So please, I just want to double check if you can see something or no. No, yes. So can you see the presentation in the screen? Okay. Okay. The PowerPoint presentation was okay. Looked okay. I will load again my presentation. Can you see the presentation? Yes, we see like small windows. They look like they are in real time. It's because I'm using another monitor. think it's better. Mhm. Thank you very much. Okay, in order to begin, I would like to share with you this slide where we see how the pandemic has been a relevant impact in all the economies during the year. But I think that this one illustrates very well what we are going through. And besides the pandemic, behind us there's a recession that starts in the first quarter of this year in the world. And this is a problem that we will see not only this year, but also it is a structural problem that could be affecting most of the economies in the following months. So I would start by coming back to the new reality. At the beginning, in many texts, we talked about a new normal, but we have another reality. We saw important changes and structural changes, both in the way we are used to consume as an important change in the way we work. Now, with the technology, this has changed what we were doing in the past. So the good news is that we are not going to be back to a similar scenario compared to the one we had, and it will be evolving since then. I would like to give you some concrete examples. There's a crisis at the global level in terms of health. We knew this before the pandemic, that globally the infrastructure that we see in the health sector was somewhat low, poor, and currently at the global level, according to the OECD, there's 3 beds per each 1,000 inhabitants and 2.9 physicians per 1,000 inhabitants. We knew this before. It was a low figure if we compare this to the needs, but clearly the pandemic, what it did is that to put this on the spotlight of the main governments globally. Well, this situation has affected many governments because we are witnessing that there's economic crisis, and eventually this will be translated into a social crisis. Most of the countries will go through important falls, recessions this year. So the question here, when we will see a recovery or something similar to what we compared to what we had at the end of last year. And this generates at the same time a social crisis. The economic crisis, we know it, but we have structural changes derived from economic crisis, but also it leads to social crisis. So it's likely that we will see deterioration in political and social terms. And we have also witnessed this with in a series of news that became relevant when we talk about migration. And those are issues that have increased as events, but at the same time we see problems in terms of the social and politics. And we see that there's a change in the guidelines of governments that made us see that we have like more populist governments. We will still have a marked trend of what we had in the last years. However, for sure, this will be a consequence as because it will be like discomfort by of the society, and this is something I like to share. The government in recession does not win the election, and let's see if we can prove them right. We have the U.S. elections, and Trump is facing a huge challenge in the midst of the crisis, major crisis, and at the same time he's facing social issues. Something similar we will see in the rest of the world, in European countries that also have changed different par- politi- political parties, becoming more leftists or parties that are extreme right, and also on Latin America, the communism. So in Mexico, clearly, and the U.S., we see a reconfiguration of the political arena, and this is because of a social problem. So the situation before us is complicated, first because of health, then economics, then the social part, and then we will see this. Okay, it is important to say about the changes that will be seen in consumption habits, mainly how we have started consuming in a different way. Most of the trade, it is digital, so for sure this will continue having an impact, and also it has an impact on companies. Many companies that used to have establishments in general, they are having to they have to downsize the the personal working in those establishments, so they will optimize the resources, knowing that in the future most of the trade will be digital. At the offices and companies, something similar is happening. The home office, that nobody like had it in mind so quickly, and we had to adapt ourselves very quickly. Otherwise, we could have been kicked out of the market. Also, the remote learning. Many schools where they have land extensions, and now in a scenario where there's no all this lighting and the facilities, and what is not being used, so could be changing in a radical way the business model in a school. And the same thing with fast food delivery, and this is the part of, or the a major part of the economic activity has been importantly translated when it comes to online. All the online companies are sharing the market share, and probably they will be out in a short period of time. We have seen an important change, and the business models will have to remodeled. And I correct the interpreter, correct. He was talking before the companies that will be offline. Okay. Now the estimation is everything that has to do with entertainment, with food, beverages in restaurants, in entertainment parks, tourism, aviation, will have an important impact in resources. We see that the consumer will be in some way growing less in he will be like more careful when it comes to entertainment or traveling, and this is due mainly because we see an important impact in the economy, and we're talking about that this is the deepest recession in the last 100 years, and people also will have a great impact on their families, the companies, where for sure there will be downsizing, and this will be translated that in that the consumer will have less resources, and many of the things that we will see is those consumption habits will be changed towards other sectors, and they will be more careful when doing an activity related to entertainment or traveling. The trips will be much more selective, more versed on ecotourism instead of being in facilities where probably there will be more people. And at the same time, the trips, business trips, will be affected, but as you can see, we can have a video conference, and this make us save in terms of transportation, the everything that has to do with accommodation, foods that had to be paid as per diem. So this will change, and where the expense of the consumer is going. Mainly, it'll go to activities related to the basic consumption sector, without no doubt. Then we have an increase in the consumption in technology and also with health. Let me tell you, even though there's optimism that as mankind to find a vaccine at the end of this year, the reality is that let's suppose that this was the best scenario. There's still we need to produce the vaccine, and in order to have it in most of the countries, the distribution part could last like 6 months more. So, in the best scenario, next year we will have uh, the activity that we are expecting, but still the scenario is like all 2021 or a good part of 2021. So there we will still be seeing that it'll take time to go back to our original scenario. But there's a structural change in the way of consuming and in the way of spending. So the way of working or consuming or spending for sure is going to be very different to that of what we were doing, and this radically change the business models that today they are adapting their offices to a hybrid system, but they will look for reducing the square meters in the offices. And for sure, many other companies will be looking for changing the business model and strategies to adapt to the new reality. So the care of every company to adapt to this new reality, where as possible to maximize the cash flows. For example, mobility and trips, it will be less interest to travel, both as like holidays or business trips, the control of borders. You don't want to be exposed for long period of times in the airport or at the bus station. So this entails important changes. Another important thing is that those new rules of the game or those changes of the business model of companies, I don't know if probably we won't see a stamp like this one, but something similar. The companies will have to have like a sort of stamp or seal visible that they are doing the best as possible to have safe places in terms of health. In this case, COVID-19 free, that this is what we will see going forward at the different companies, be it restaurants, offices, government offices, private offices, even in different services. So they will be like putting in their model, business model, some processes of sanitization in all the activities. So this implies like higher costs for companies and more expenses that will be made in order to comply with those requirements that for sure will be imposed. And at the end, this has a consequence in a lower profitability in companies, and one part can be translated to the end consumer. If I go to a restaurant where the capacity is limited, this implies a diminution in terms of the potential revenues of a restaurant, and at the same time it increases the expenses because of the measures that they need to have, and with this it'll affect they will have a lower profitability, and this will be the case in many companies or other businesses. And what we have seen so far, it was a shock in the productive chains. During the first quarter, we had important drops that we never saw in many decades. We didn't see like the break on this chains, the closing of activities in countries. But the good news here that we see the reopening in different countries. For sure, the impact or the worst part of this, we saw it during the first and second quarter. Probably the second one was the most complicated one, but it's going to be really difficult to see again the scenario that we saw in the second quarter, but the consequence could remain during a long period of time. Probably we will have a second wave. Yes, we have started to see the second wave in Europe, and the infections are higher than the maximum observed in the last month. For sure, we will have a second wave. This will be unavoidable, but I think that despite this, we don't see a closing compared to what we saw before. So what they will be implementing on the side of the government is certain measures or requirements to the different productive activities, but we will not have like a definite closing like the one we saw. Many companies or businesses or personally, we wanted to see like a specific date where to come back. For sure, it'll take many months, and we will have to adapt ourselves little by little when it comes to our activities. There will be important effects. What has to do with production or manufacturing, I think it could move forward, but many of the services could be severely affected, and probably they won't go back to the activity they had before. Many businesses mainly the service, there will be the most impacted from now on. So the good news is that the worst is over, and as of now, we will see a sort of recovery. On the other hand, we see there's a debate around this if the if we can do it in a U or L or V shape. There's a soup of letters on how we can see this recovery. It seems that we saw the recession, the deepest recession of the last 100 years, and as of now, we will see a sort of recovery by, if we compare this to the prior quarter, we see important growth. If we take as a base the data observed in 2019, probably it'll take us longer. This recovery will depend on the mechanisms implemented by each one of the governments, on one hand, to try to mitigate the fall and looking for a recovery as soon as possible at a better pace. So many decided to implement economic stimuli and only help to mitigate the fall. And this is important because if they manage to mitigate the fall, it is going to be easier to recover. Unlike other countries that unfortunately Mexico is among them, that there has not been mechanisms, and the ones that have been implemented are very limited. So the fall has been very severe in the second quarter, and with such a fall, the recovery will be slow. We don't see like further mechanisms, and the more the governments take, the recovery will take longer. So this is an idea of the economic falls, and I would say that to pay attention to the fall that you can see globally, because there are some questions around this. So I would like to say that globally there's a drop of 4.9% for 2020. Even in global terms, it is expected to have a recovery near 5 or 5.4% for the following year. As we saw in the graph, many countries will have important drops or falls, since some countries like China, even they have a drop in the economic activity, they will still have growth near 1%. Other economies, such as India, the drop is 4.5%, which is less globally. But in the case of our country, Mexico, it is the International Monetary Fund is estimating a fall of minus 10.5. It's not only the effect of the fall, but what we can expect in terms of recovery for next year. For China, that it will be less affected. There will be a very slow growth compared to what they had before, 7 or 6%. Now they have 1%, but the recovery, they will have 8.2%. In the case of the global economy, the growth is expected to be at 5%. And as a way of example, in the case of Mexico, we will be one of the countries with the greatest fall, and the recovery will be slower. So it will depend a lot on the strategies of the different governments to think of a recovery, not only in 2021. I would say in the following years, 2020, in some way, we have a rebound effect, and we need to see if this is going to be sustainable in the following year. So just to give you some data, it's estimated that to reach levels near the ones of 2019 in average at the global level, we will see in 2 years that in a particular case of Mexico, it could be at 5 years.
And it could be a little bit more, close to 10. So let's see this complicated landscape. For this year, we can have a double recession if we have a second wave of this pandemic. We need to consider additionally also the flu could also generate important effects in the economy. And this mainly has effects on unemployment. Employment recovery will take longer. Now, in terms of companies, what do we have? A drop in consumption. Consumption is mainly related to this change of habits. The basic health and technology sectors are the ones that are stronger. On the other hand, other sectors related to entertainment can also be affected. With this low consumption, companies can have lower sales and the need to close. Under this landscape, if they close, there's an increase in unemployment, and this is a vicious circle. A way to break it, or at least to mitigate this effect, could be first, underline that companies should prioritize cash flow, especially taking into consideration that the scenario that we have seen, even when there is a little recovery, it can take longer. So we need to control expenses, not only of costs, because costs could be related to the cost to generate a product. This somehow is also related to sales. If you sell more, you have higher costs. But talking about expenses, I want to stress out this because that expense structure will allow companies to become stronger, to survive, and then get into a recovery stage. Something that we're recently seeing is that many companies, once the economy is opening, they are opening their businesses and trying to get as soon as possible to activities. It is important, however, to pay attention to the proper use of capital. And what do I mean by this? Not only opening the business again. We generate some flow, but we need to see if this is optimal. Many companies, when they open their business again, they start spending again. When they don't have original income, then this can be reflected in losses. And these losses will eat up your capital. And with this landscape, you can survive for a period, but if activities are not normalized, you are going to lose your capital. So you need to look for optimal uses of capital. So on one hand, if conditions that are proper are not in place, at least you shouldn't be losing your capital because it could take longer for a recovery. We need to be really careful with capital and expenses. It is also expensive to exercise credit lines. We started to see some opening in credit lines. Now, depending on each business or company, it is important to have these credit lines open and exercise them in a landscape where you might have some restriction in terms of cash use. We need to identify also how the business model will be with an intensive use of technology. It is also important to consider the use of technology in all businesses. We need to see how to implement technology increasingly. This will continue to happen. Those companies that didn't use technologies were out of the game. Those that have some technology have survived. Those that invested in technology can be taking the next step. But if they do not advance, they will eventually be out. We have seen this in different businesses and sectors. Then it is very important for companies the use of technology. A big part of trade in goods and services is going to be online. So we need to remember that. On the other hand, if unemployment increases, this will continue affecting consumption. The longer it takes for economies to open, the bigger the harm is going to be. I know this is not in the hand of companies. We require incentives, stimuli from the government. We see this in all countries. If you are not implementing these incentives, companies die. Once they die, it is very difficult to recover them. And with this, we're losing jobs. It is very important for governments to implement credit lines available to support companies, support families. Of course, each country will have a different capability, but this is the time. This is the time when we need to enter into debt, execute credit lines, of course, with contra-cyclic policies. But it is important to observe health, family support, and companies. What we have seen is many economic incentives in other countries. For example, they are equivalent to the total of the US GDP. It is about 24-25% of the world economy. All these economic incentives are almost 1/4 of the world GDP. Some countries, like the UK, have implemented amounts that surpass 50% of their GDP. Same in the United States. That's the size of the incentives. The US Fed has 2.3 billion US dollars to continue their support. They have just used 5%. These resources should be for the health sector to support families and companies. Unfortunately, some countries like Mexico do not have these incentives. Mexico is even lower than other Latin American countries that have implemented economic incentives, going above 5% of the GDP. Even Argentina, when they are experiencing a complex situation, they have bigger incentives than Mexico. And I'm going to share something with you. The increase of economic stimuli or incentives has caused that different economic blocks, they are going to be depreciating their currencies. What we have seen is that with these economic incentives, particularly United States has announced important incentives, making somehow the dollar before other currencies to show some weakness. This has generated that other currencies, including emerging country currencies, have some appreciation. This includes the Mexican peso, and this is due to the weakness of the dollar due to this situation. We can see here where practically the US dollar, this is an index of dollar behavior before other currencies. We have seen a depreciation of the US dollar. Certainly, as new incentives are announced, we will see a higher US dollar depreciation and appreciation for emerging countries' currencies. Now, talking about the United States, there's a significant drop in this second quarter, but in the future we would expect some recovery, a faster U.S. recovery than the rest of the world, and this would be positive for our country. Some data. In the United States, the PMI of the manufacturing sector is around the 50s. Some recoveries, sales of new houses, we see a growth of 12%, even when there was an important drop. Now they are growing. Somehow, sales in general, this is retail sales, show some recovery. With this, we might see a post-recovery, and this also will help the global economy. Talking about unemployment, we can see levels of 14.7. To have an idea, when the crisis of 2008, when the unemployment rate reached 10%, was considered extreme. In this case, it reached 14.7%, and we have seen a slow recovery. An updated figure of last month, we can see that right now is below 10%. So the U.S. economy is recovering. This is positive. In spite of this recovery, inflation in the United States will remain stable for a long time below 2%. Interest rates will henceforth be low. From here up to 2022, the cost of money will be cheap. So there's a likeliness of a global recovery. Now, elections in the United States. I'm not going to stop a lot here. According to the last polls, we can see Biden on top. And also, at some bet houses, he's at the top. And we have the support of those core states. This victory is not related to the popular vote, but to electoral colleges with some important states. Something that is a concern is the composition of Congress. In general terms, for investors, it is preferable to have a divided and more balanced Congress, especially for the proposals of both candidates. It is very likely that the Democrats or Biden not only will win the presidency, but also the Senate and the House of Representatives. But Trump would be looking for deregulation. Biden, on the contrary, will look to increase taxes in some sectors. This is not well seen by some business sectors, and this could generate some volatility. However, according to what we have already said, we need to point out that Trump has threatened not to acknowledge the results from a long time ago. We can see that this voting can be taken by post office. This is going to generate more volatility. So this is a complicated landscape in the future. I'm not going to stop too much here, but something important here is that Biden would be looking to increase taxes from 21 to 28%, while Trump has announced that he would reduce taxes. This is one of the main topics. So the questions are, results would be recognized. We do not know that. Certainly, if Trump loses, he might not recognize results. Which is more convenient for LATAM relationship? I think that the best for the world, for the situation on how U.S. has been managed, they have lost some leadership. I think that Trump has generated many conflicts. So if Biden defeats Trump, could be better for the world. But we need to acknowledge that for investors that are more pro-market, they prefer Trump. Now, in the particular case of Mexico, we want to share this. In Mexico, we see important drops in GDP, primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. And this could be also translated into other economies, other countries. The industrial sectors related to exports can be recovering much more than the internal consumption. To conclude, I would like to say that without investment, there is no growth. In Mexico, we have seen an important drop in investment for several months. We do not see an inflection point yet. We need to think in more growth in Latin America. Therefore, it is important to attract investment. This is what generates employment, growth, and for this we need trust and certainty. This is where we have the main growth and attraction factors. Of course, the rule of law to generate security. And I'm going to talk about Mexico specifically. We have seen a drop in interest rates, 4.25. We consider it's going to be there. Probably an additional decrease in interest rates. We can see here that they are minimum levels, in some cases negative levels. This could help investment and to attract investments that help to foster growth. I think that I'm okay on time right now. But to conclude, a lot of currencies have shown appreciation in the last months, mainly for the weakness of dollar before this currency basket. We can see that incentives will continue, interest rates low, and this could help to have some global economic recovery. And we can see the growth potential. Now, risk factors. We can see a second wave of the pandemic. The IMF is revisiting the previous consideration of recession. But this could also bring weaknesses and tensions for different countries. Geopolitical stress between US and China, I think it will remain. If Biden wins, this could improve. If Trump wins, the conflict will continue. A drop in commodity prices. And with this, I conclude. Up to here my presentation. We are on time. If there is any question, I'll be glad to answer. As it was mentioned, if you have any question, you can ask it now. And if you have any question, let us know. Otherwise, we will continue with the agenda. No participation? Well, thank you very much. Now we will continue with the agenda. I would like to thank for his participation. This is a very interesting topic. We always have some questions about the financial situation in the country, especially when we depend a lot on another country like the United States. So, if there's any question, we will send it as an email to you so you can provide us an answer. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask Orfa for a message, and please, she's going to hand out your participation diploma. Orfa, please. Good afternoon, Master Carlos Alberto González. Thank you very much for your presentation. We're more than happy for your conference, for these prospects of Mexico. Thank you very much because this was an interesting topic. This is your participation diploma. We thank you again. UC&CS America hands out the present participation diploma to Master Carlos Alberto González Tabares for his valuable participation as speaker during the Technical Conference Cycle 2020. This is a World Financial Flash News. October 13th, 2020. Thank you very much. We are really grateful with you. Thank you very much, Master.